Celtics Talk Podcast is presented by 24autogroup.com. 11 locations across New England.
What's up, everybody? Another episode of the Celtics Talk Podcast. Yeah, we're keeping them rolling this postseason. This time we're diving in to the minutia of the new collective bargaining agreement, something that's going to make Boston's life a little bit difficult moving forward. I got my cap guru, Ryan Bernardoni. You might know him as Danger Cart online, Dan Gerkart, whatever you want to call him. Ryan is the best at this stuff. You've definitely heard him on the pod here before. He knows how to drill down into the minutia here to figure out like what the best path forward is for the Celtics, because I don't think there's a lot of obvious answers. There's a lot of punitive measures being added to this CBA that are going to make it difficult for teams like the Celtics that have spent to be super competitive, to stay there and to keep all their talent. It could force tough decisions as early as this summer, could force them to move on from, core players sooner than later. But who will that be? Well, just going to have to stick around and really, really see if that tease was worth it. Here's my chat with Ryan. All right, Ryan, recording this on Thursday afternoon, fresh off of Brad Stevens' State of the End of the Union. What was your biggest takeaway from what Brad said?
I guess no surprise, but no new coach. Joe Mazzulla will be back as the head coach of the Boston Celtics. Looks like some amount of new staff with him. At least that's what they're planning on and working towards. But I think Brad gave a pretty positive assessment of Joe and a lot of confidence behind him to bring him back next year.
How do you feel about that?
Mixed. It's the problem isn't that I think that he won't develop into being a really good coach. I have no real way of knowing that. It's just that with a team in the position that they are now, it's difficult to have faith that will happen on the timeline that they need it to happen to compete for a title next year. I don't think that he was quite up to the level of what you would hope. That's not to say that they would have won the title with a different coach this year, but with the way things worked out during the season, it's putting a lot of faith in development and in staff building and in having an off season and things like that may work out, but we don't really know.
Yeah, and I'm with you in this regard. Like, this is a team that kind of clearly needs someone to be the adult in the room and watch over them. And we saw that at the end of the Eastern Conference Finals, where Joe finally starts calling timeouts, and it saved the team in some instincts. And I do agree. Like, I don't know if a different coach would have changed anything. I think some continuity off of last year certainly could have gone a long way. And maybe they don't lose their identity as much as they did for stretches, and maybe that was unavoidable with Rob being out as much as he was. But I am interested to see just what Joe can do with a full year of learning in that seat. I am interested to see who they put in that position. Everyone's wondering if it'll be someone like a Frank Vogel, or will they just do Steven Silas, who has been hanging out around here. The fact that Brad kept saying it would be someone with a bunch of playoff or a bunch of coaching experience does lead me to believe it's someone that will have been through the rigors of this and is maybe more willing to uproot their life and come back to Boston than they were when they were first looking back in the end of September. But certainly, I get why people are up in arms about it. I just thought it was kind of foolish that people thought they would go fourth coach in 4 years and Brad's hands-picked selection would be moved out. And I get it. Maybe there would be pressure from ownership. But I think they understand that the issues of this team were deeper than just the head coach. Now, we always bring you on because of your smarts with the CBA. Brad didn't want to go too deep into it, suggesting that they only know 99.9% of the rules, which I think is probably enough to start figuring out what comes next. I'm interested. I think when you wrote up your little thing on your page on Medium, and I think again you always lay it out very eloquently. Before I even offer my thoughts, what was your biggest takeaway as you start to digest the new rules and what's ahead for this team?
It's a difficult rule set for the Celtics in particular and other teams that have sort of landed where they landed with high payrolls. And I think it's a tough situation for them to be in because the rules are pretty significantly different in some important ways from the previous CBA, and the ramp up period between basically now and when those rules kick in full force is, in my opinion, not long enough. They are changing the rules too drastically, too quickly. I think the way that they're changing some of the rules are just sort of too drastic to begin with, and that fans of the league will not like some of the impacts of how things happen. But to me, the sort of first problem is that if you want to reshape the rules in the way they have, which we can talk more about the specifics, but functionally what they're trying to do is narrow the band of where teams live. They don't want teams that are way below the salary floor at different times. They don't want teams like the Warriors and the Clippers that are way above the tax. They want to pull everybody into a narrower band of full team salaries, which is fine. You can design your league that way if you want, but you can't have decades of letting teams operate in one way and incentivizing one type of team building where you build up your salaries over time. And eventually, when you're at the point of contention with star players in their primes, you have large salaries and are paying a lot of tax as the penalty for that, to kind of immediately say, no, actually, you can't do that anymore. And the teams that are already there are then stranded, having to make difficult decisions, in some cases, decisions that will hurt them in ways beyond just having to cut salary. They'll have to give up assets in order to cut salaries and things like that. And so the speed of change is, I think, unfair and poorly designed, on top of some things that I have questions about in terms of just the generic design, but that we'll have to see more sort of how they play out over time. So that's my first takeaway.
Who's happy here? Like, like owners happy that are players happy? Like, because I can't quite wrap my head around like who's winning in this new CBA.
So I think that it's in any collective bargaining agreement, you're going to have people who win on both sides in certain ways, and that not everybody is going to win. The players are not one block that are all have the same, Grant Williams has different considerations than Sam Hauser, who has different considerations than Jaylen Brown. And Wyc Grousbeck has different considerations than Steve Ballmer or whoever owns, whatever small market team you want to pick. They do have different considerations, but I think both sides take things out of this that they can say as a win. So from the players' perspective, the players who are at the very top end of the salary scale, if you're Jason Tatum, you're going to get the full max anyway. But there are other players who maybe think of themselves as max players who now are going to have conversations with their teams, where their team is saying, well, I think you should take less money to help the team and things like that, which will be viewed as something that's not great. And there will be players who are forced to move off of teams that they don't want to move off of beyond just the normal sort of trade churn. The team will want them and the player will want them, and they'll have to be traded anyway. And that will be bad in those instances. But the big thing for the players is that they get more money in the pool, right? So they get roughly half the money of all basketball revenue. And what is defined as basketball revenue is growing by a small amount. They've added some new things into that pool. So the players as a whole, when revenues increase, what they define as basketball revenues increase, their total share of that increases as well. So that's the first thing. There are also other things in there. Exceptions are going up. So mid-level exception players, the exceptions going up a little bit. There's players who aren't even in the union yet, like future second-round draft picks get a little bit of a bonus. There's people like Grant Williams get a little bit higher of a qualifying offer, a little bit shorter of a waiting period for matching a restricted free agent offer. So there's different player groups that do gain out of this. And I think in total, those player groups add up to a good, majority of the union. On the other side, the owners, the high revenue owners get to go to, or the high paying owners get to go to the teams that are sort of free riders and live at a lower while they're losing games and trying to tank and things like that. There are rules that say you really do have to move up to at least the salary for at least 90% of the salary cap for what you're paying. And those same owners who are at the low end get to go to the high end owners and say, well, you can't just kill us with money. You can't flood with cash. And so those bans are, again, that's not an inherently bad thing to want for your league. I do think that it will cause some negative impacts, but to me, really, again, the problem is that they're trying to do that too quickly. So who loses out in that? If there are some players who lose out, there are some owners who lose out. My opinion, who loses out is ultimately the fans who like to see continuity in a certain type of team building towards a certain type of championship contender that will now be less likely to be built and more difficult to sustain. And so I think that the sort of generic fan may not like this, while the people who make up the league have reasons to like it.
Yeah, and I think it's eloquently put that, I mean, Brad Stevens has favored various mechanisms, most of which are rooted in wanting the core players of your team under contract long term and being willing to pay for that benefit. And now it feels like there will be some complications that come from it. And that second apron just seems punitive with the way that the restrictions that we'll put on, and we'll get on into that in a minute. You did mention one thing that I thought was interesting, and that's, teams are now going to have to go to players and say, will you take something less than max to help the team? And certainly that feels like an instance of what the Celtics are in right now, where we can debate all day about what you think about Jaylen Brown and whether they should give him the full supermax. I'm of the ilk that if I'm Jaylen and I took what was at least viewed as below market deal in my last extension, I am certainly not probably open-minded to the idea of losing any money moving forward. And I just think that it could be detrimental for the Celtics to suggest he should take anything less than that max. I mean, do you see any way the Celtics don't just roll out that full supermax for him, even if it could aid like getting one more player on the roster?
Not for the money. I don't think that has any real chance of happening. I don't think they will want to give him a final year option, which is always something that can be negotiated, where Jason can basically come to them and define terms, right? I think that they will at least fight on that one thing. That also aligns both of their contracts together a little bit more clearly.
Nice. Yeah.
When you get into the next extension, if basically you're saying that Jason is going to have functionally a 4-year extension because he'll have an option, and Jaylen will have a 5-year extension that starts a year earlier, right? So there's some things like that maybe they talk about. I mean, you can get into incentives. His current contract has incentives, but you also have to remember in these cases, there's two other things. One is that this is the first year of the new CBA. You may get 3 or 4 years in where you see teams have like actual point. You can say like, this is what happened to this team. They had to lose this player because they had a max player. And you'll get examples where then you can kind of use, where owners and GMs will use that as a cudgel against their own players, basically, what you see a lot in the NFL and other places. Right now, that doesn't exist. It's all hypothetical at this point. The other thing is that Jaylen, as a leader in the union, is even less likely than most players to then give back money. Now, how much money the players in total get is set anyway. Jaylen's only getting a smaller, a larger percentage of the total pool. It doesn't take money out of the union if anybody takes less money, if any individual takes less money on their contract. But in his position, I would find it very unlikely that he is amenable to taking anything less than the full max in terms of the dollars. And then you're talking about other things like structure of payments and trade kickers aren't even going to matter because he's going to be making the max, but that type of thing. Or the bigger one being the final year of player option. I think the team may hold the line on that as best they can. So, but dollars, what does it really gain you in the end anyway?
Right. And that's been my whole thing, is that people have said, well, if you took X million dollars off it, now you have $8 extra million per year. And it's like, well, yeah, okay. So in your mind, you're saying that pays for Grant Williams, but Grant Williams isn't going to be making $8 million most likely, unless this settles for a qualifying offer. And even then, salaries are going to escalate. And I just don't think it's worth the fight when
we're not talking about 8 anyway. We're talking about 2 or 3. I mean, exactly. Nobody's talking 8 is not realistic. You're talking about smaller amounts than that you would even be possibly negotiating on.
Exactly. So the bigger question, of course, is do you, based on your ability to build the roster, would you give Jaylen that money? And while some people are just overreactionary and saying, oh, he had 8 turnovers in Game 7 of the NBA Finals and hasn't shown enough growth there, I trade him for superstar X. When you look at it, and you're coming from, I think, a different perspective than most, like you have the basketball side, but you're also looking at the number side. Does it make financial sense for the Boston Celtics to commit 35% of the cap to 2 different players?
So for any team, it can make sense to commit 35% to 2 different players. If those 2 players are, the example I used in the thing I wrote up was, if you can get prime LeBron James and Steph Curry, you should pay them each 35% of the salary cap. The problem is that that's obviously not the situation that the Celtics are in, and that Jaylen is, for all that he was second team All NBA, I don't think anybody believes that if he was the lead player on any team, that team would be a title contender. So it's difficult. My personal opinion is that the rule set that we're moving into, in large part because, in my opinion, the second apron that we're talking about, which functionally operates as a hard cap because it has a lot of restrictions on team building, from how you can make trades down to the draft and contract exceptions and everything else, that the team will not be able to operate over that line for any period of time, probably not even a single year. If you're winning the title, defending the title, okay, you can maybe go over it for a year, make the sacrifices with a plan to come back down, but you can't reasonably stay above that line for any period of time. And so it's not viable for them to have both Jaylen and Jason on the team making that amount. But that doesn't come for 2 years, right? So that's a different question than, does it make sense to extend him as opposed to trying to trade him now, which in my opinion, they will and probably should. And again, we can talk more about that. But yeah, I think that there's a time on it now, where before this CBA, it was like, well, they're going to make a lot of money, but it's just luxury tax payments, and ownership makes a bunch of money, particularly if you're winning, so they should just be willing to pay it. Like, part of why the owners like this rule set, I think, is because now they can say, like, oh, no, that's not the case anymore. Now we have no choice. It's been taken out of our hands. It's not just our money. It's actually the team. And so, my hands are tied. I can't sign this contract. I can't keep this player. And they like to basically have an out on cheaping out, right? And so I think that that's probably where this ends up, is that there is not more than, I don't even think there will be a full year where both of them are making 35% of the cap while on the Celtics, unless they win the title between now and then. But it's
a fair point.
Is a question.
It's a fair point. And like I sit here, and I guess for me, it's the easiest thing to do is to kind of kick that can down the road. And so I agree. Like, you don't have to really worry about it till Tatum's extension kicks in. Well, while there'll still be pain points along that way, and I do think that the tinkering starts this offseason, and all of a sudden the luxury of having a Malcolm Brogdon isn't there anymore, and you have to move him, and he's probably a negative asset at his value. And what his defensive ability getting exposed a little bit there in the postseason. So I do wonder if we'll start to feel the effects immediately. It sure felt like Brad was posturing towards, like, we're bringing back this core, and look, he's got to say that, and I fully understand that there could be scenarios and trades that pop up that every team has to consider. But my guess is that this thing will look very similar into next year with small tweaks on the periphery. But certainly as those extensions start to trigger, it puts a little bit more of an emphasis on it. And 1 year outside of the Supermax, now you can move it Jaylen more freely, and that will open up avenues to maybe think about trades a little bit hotter than I think you necessarily have to now. But I guess, where do you land? Are you just like, he's at the top of his, based on his play and his all NBA season, that this is probably the most value you can get for Jaylen Brown? Are you more likely to want to deal him now for the best available deal? Or would you be okay with seeing how this goes for one more season and kind of getting there, and then, but the prohibitive nature of his next contract? I guess, where do you land on what they should do with Jaylen?
Yeah. And so I think that there's a couple different threads we can pull out of that question. On Jaylen in particular, my opinion is that there will not be a good enough market for him right now to trade him. Now, if somebody comes with some amazing offer, and it only takes one team, right? That's what you always say. Then you have to at least strongly consider it if there's some wonderful trade out there. The problem is that any other team that trades for him really cannot extend him, right? So I had posed in, again, what I was writing up, that a team that was way under the salary cap could do a renegotiate an extension with him right away, because in the previous CBA, there was no waiting period on that. I have, in reading through what's available for the new CBA, which is 90 pages of information, I found that they've actually changed that as well, which I didn't know, and I hadn't seen reported anywhere before, that even that team, like, say, the Spurs or the Rockets or somebody like that, would not be able to renegotiate and extend him right away. So anybody trading for him has a 6-month waiting period on extending him. If it's a team that's not going to be under the salary cap, which, by the way, because of the new rules on the salary floor, is going to be nobody 6 months after they trade for him, then the only way that they can extend him is to extend him basically up to his max, his 30% max, but carrying over his current incentives. And once he's halfway through the year, why wouldn't he just wait until the end of the year to sign a new contract that gets rid of those incentives and just pays him the full 30% and gets him a player option and whatever else he wants? It would just make more sense in any circumstance for him to wait through the year. So who is the team that's going to take that risk and give the Celtics back something that they want that keeps them in contention now? Because we're not talking about like draft pick packages that they want, unless you're able to flip those draft picks to a third team, and then things get really complicated. So I don't know who the market is right now. You want to tell me that the Rockets want him so badly that they would do it, or that Atlanta thinks, oh, he's from Atlanta, we can definitely re-sign him, or his agent says, okay, I promise that we'll re-sign. Well, we've seen players who make that sort of back channel commitment, at least we think, who then just change their mind, right? Things don't go as well as you would hope, and they don't work out. So who is the team that's going to trade for him now to give the Celtics everything that they would need in order to feel confident moving forward, as opposed to just playing out next season and saying, look, we were some bad injury timing and really awful shooting luck away from back-to-back finals appearances, despite the fact that we had a new coach who, was elevated on the eve of the season, and a whole host of other things. Why wouldn't you just run it again next year and see if you just like win the title next year? And if you don't, well, then he's on a very expensive, but also a long and team controlled contract where at least the pool of teams willing to trade for him would probably be larger and willing to trade for him in packages that, again, you would feel confident taking and moving forward with as a contending team. So that's where I land on Jaylen. I don't know if you have thoughts on that. We can also then talk about what else they should be thinking about this offseason, maybe in that context. But
Yeah, no, let's go there. So like, let's say that just to me, it seems pretty easy. Like I think they're going to put the Supermax in front of them. It's going to be the full Supermax. And I think Jaylen signs it, and they both just kind of agree like, hey, this is perfectly good situation. This gives the Celtics a really good chance to compete. It puts Jaylen in the most money possible. And if for whatever reason, if for both sides can kind of reassess along the way. But I do think it's just I'm with you. I look around the league and I'm like, what team is making this trade and what are they offering? Like the Celtics said no to Kevin Durant last year, and like it or at least didn't fully explore the potential of Kevin Durant. So it seems to suggest that they're pretty bullish on Jaylen and what they would need in return to even explore a deal. I don't think anyone is getting close to that package. And, I've been wrong before, but I do think it's just the path of least resistance for both sides. So the question does become, before we even worry about the further CBA ramifications down the road, what do the 2023-24 Celtics do to ensure they are championship caliber? So we heard Brad say today, small tweaks, kind of like finding some, hoping for, as usual, internal improvement, and that you hope Jaylen puts some heavy emphasis, goes dribble a basketball in the ocean for an entire offseason or whatever it needs to be. But what would you like to see them do on the periphery? What do you feel is their biggest moving forward with this core?
Yeah. So nobody likes having to answer the question in the way that I'm going to answer the question, because nobody wants to say they should trade a player or that they should get somebody off the team. Because these are all players who, played for the Celtics this year. Like, I don't want to be sitting there being like, they should get rid of this guy. They should do this and that. But there are financial realities that they have to face. And to me, the problem is, if you want to maximize next year, then I agree that that's sort of what Brad sounded like he was saying, was that they're going to bring the team back largely intact, or, as close to as they can. My problem is that these new CBA rules that are coming are going to cause problems. There's just no real way around that. And if they wait until next offseason, then they're going to be one of a number of teams that are all looking at the same math and saying, boy, we have to cut X number of millions of dollars out of our cap sheet, basically. And there's only, because they keep more and more limiting what your like mechanisms for cutting salary are, other than like waiving and stretching players, which nobody wants to do, like particularly with multiple years and dollars left. But you can't trade for non-guaranteed salaries anymore and cut, and then just waive those guys. Teams can't immediately renegotiate and extend guys where a cap space team might be more interested in taking on a player if they were able to do that right away. And now they can't do that right away. So you're basically facing the risk, at least, we don't know that this will be the case, of say 8 teams all wanting to cut 15 to more, 15, 20, in some cases more than that, millions of dollars off their cap sheet, and only having, say, 3 or 4 teams that have cap space at all that they're willing to auction off in that manner, particularly because teams are going to have to get up to the floor this year. You're probably going to do that by signing multi-year contracts or picking up players. Like, as you pull everybody closer to the middle and you cut teams off the bottom, well, there then aren't teams to take on the money from the teams at the top who need to cut money if you wait until the last minute. So are you better off moving early? In my opinion, yes. You don't want to risk getting stuck in that trap. The obvious answer to this is one of 2 things. One is that you let Grant Williams walk and you get nothing back for him, and that's the position where you're relatively weak. The other is that you try to trade one of Brogdon, Smart, or White into a team that has cap space and is willing to basically send little or nothing back, and you cut money now, maybe even to the point of getting under the luxury tax for other reasons down the line. But basically, you're trying to get your books in order so that you don't get caught in the crunch next year where you're giving up 2 first-round draft picks in order to, dump $25 million in salary. So out of that, I think it would be Brogdon would be the one that would make the most sense if you can find a team that's willing to take him without sending much or any salary back, even if you get nothing for him, even if it's like, we put a first-round draft pick into it. Had he been healthy, in the conference finals and he makes 8 threes instead of 3 threes, maybe they're in the finals. It was a worthy risk to take. But if they knew that this CBA was coming, they may not have made that trade to begin with. And now in the position that they're in, can you kind of get out of it and set yourself up better? So again, I don't like having to call like, hey, they should trade Malcolm Brogdon for nothing, because he seems like a nice person who worked hard for the team and took on a role that made some sacrifices and all that. But like realistically, that's kind of where the numbers point.
His refusal to throw lobs to Rob. We'll make it okay for me to move on from Malcolm Brogdon. But no, in general, it's true. Like, you don't want to hinder your roster. You don't want to be taking away when it felt like, you need every little bit to get back to the stage you want to get to. I do think that if you're
Pritchard being there is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, look, we all sat there and looked at the roster going into the year and we're like, wow, all right, 4 guards that can play, but kind of thin at the up front. And they never really did anything beyond adding Mike Muscala to change that. And so I do think you can just allocate your resources differently. And as much as you don't want to have to swallow hard, the reality is, like, the rules changed. And now you're looking at a situation where you might have to just kind of start making that maneuvering. And, I thought it was interesting. There was both during the full media scrum and then when I got Brad a little bit afterward, it sort of hinted that, not only with like Grant's playing time, obviously with Peyton, but the Celtics ran into a little bit of the 2019 conundrum. You have too much talent. You can't play everybody. Guys were not always thrilled with their roles. And you add in the fact that, Rob missed time, which opened up minutes at the start of the year, but then put a squeeze at the end of the year. And even Muscala coming in and has no role, that maybe the Celtics need to better kind of just look at it and say, okay, here's our 7 that we're probably going to ride in the postseason. Now we need as cheap as possible to sort of fill the gaps during the regular season, limit minutes. Hopefully Joe gets a little bit better about not running his superstars into the ground over the course of the 82. And just better construct a roster to both to pacify the new agreement, but also, like, give your guys the roles that they need and allow them to feel needed and feel like they have adequate playing time. So I do think just one of those guards invariably has to go, and we can sit here and have harder conversations about Marcus Smart. But I still think, like, I know Jaylen loves him, and I think he fits really good with that core. And we can sit here and wonder if there's a better pure point guard out there. But Marcus has sort of shown in this role, he's really good when he's engaged and focused. And I do think that some of his slippage is as much for this team's trouble and this season, and defensively he could be a whole lot better and get back to that level. So, long-winded way of saying I'm with you. I think Brogdon's probably the guy. I'm struggling to figure out exactly who is the team that takes him on and just what you could even get back. Like you said, I think you'd be hoping to get at least like a role player or somebody on your bench that could fill a role or fill be a big man that you didn't have last year. But I don't necessarily know if that's potential because he's a negative asset at his salary level and with 2 years left. And as everybody starts worrying about the future of this CBA.
Look no further than the award-winning 24 Auto Group. With over 2,600 vehicles in stock, the brands you love, backed by the savings and service you can count on. Visit today or shop online at 24autogroup.com.
Is there anything they can do? Like, what are the other roadmaps here for adding? Like, do you just set aside the mid-level and hope that Grant stays at that money? Do you sign Grant and then just punt on the mid-level? Like, what do you think is the best way to, if they say, let's operate with the idea that they're getting rid of one of these 3 guards. How do you fill out the roster from there?
Yeah. And so I think that there's a question there that first needs to be asked of, are you trying to get under the luxury tax? Part of the CBA changes is also that repeater taxes are more punitive, particularly at the very low end. And there's a question to me of, will they pay 3-for-1 taxes even at the low end of the salary scale when they could be paying $1 for $1 at that low end if they avoid the repeater, especially after Jason's contract comes up. So if you were to trade Brogdon, for example, it becomes pretty easy to get under the tax, even bringing back Grant. Now, if that is an imperative, again, which maybe it's not, then you're looking at a situation where you're really trying to trade him for functionally nothing coming back. So you're saying a role player coming back, a big man, something like that. That if you don't care about the tax, or if you don't mind being 5 minutes in or whatever, or $5 million in or $10 million in, then that's a perfectly reasonable way of adding to the team. If you are trying to get under the tax, it gets more difficult where you add. And you get into a situation where it's like, well, you're hoping to match a contract for Grant around the MLE. You're looking to maybe trade Brogdon now with literally getting nothing back. No draft pick even, just saying like, if Dallas, if you'll take him, if Houston, if you want an adult in the room and you have cap space, whatever, right? You're looking at that sort of situation. And then I think where you are is exactly what you were just saying, where it's like, maybe you don't want to add, maybe you don't want to add another player who needs to be playing. So Blake Griffin seemed like a really good fit on the team because you could use him when necessary, but he understood the role that he had on the team, and I think filled it admirably. So you may be looking more at like that, where you're saying, we're going into this and we're going to go back to playing double bigs. And maybe that's Al's moving to the bench. And so it's going to be Grant and Rob as your ideal starting pair, and health, will dictate some of that. And you're going to play Jaylen and Jason. And you get into a difficult conversation there about that Derek was clearly the better guard this year than Smart was. But I would assume Marcus would stay as a starter. And that's going to shuffle around, obviously, with rest and with health and everything else. But you sort of have 7 there, Hauser, Muscala. You really need another defensive wing in there somewhere. None of them are inexpensive. Could Begaron provide an emergency role in there? Probably not, but who knows? So, but the point that you were making before of like, do you really want to have 11 guys who need to play again?
Right.
Or are you better off having 9 and a couple who are break glass in case of emergency, and a couple of veterans who are at the end of the bench, and then JD Davidson and whoever else at the very end who are just developmental projects? And that's I think a completely reasonable way to build the team. Basically just going back to what you expected the team to be before they were able to go out and trade for Brogdon, and saying like, yeah, that roster went to the finals and is fine. If you can add one more player in there via taxpayer mid-level or something like that fills a role because you don't really care about the tax and you're just sort of committed to paying big luxury taxes for the next 7 years, then wonderful. As a fan, I would prefer that. But that's a question that seems to be every year around this time we have to ask that question about what's the appetite for paying tax.
Yeah, well, I'm just bracing myself for the Zuham Begaron being your defensive-minded wing, or like maybe Summer League will actually be worth monitoring this year and seeing if any of these guys can fill a role. And if JD Davison is your 4th guard, whatever the case may be, not the worst thing. Like
we just lost to a team that has a whole bunch of undrafted guys. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, Vincent at one point was in the same position. Max Strus was at one point in the same position. Duncan Robinson, like there is a case for like what one of the things that this CBA necessitates is a greater focus on developing particularly players who weren't high first round picks, right? Finding the diamond in the rough, finding how you can develop them into a role that they can fit with becomes ever more important as there's more of a hard cap that's not particularly high for where the team currently is. Like you're going to have to hit on one of those guys. And Hauser for the regular season looked very much like that. And then, despite the fact that they couldn't score and couldn't shoot, they just couldn't find a place for him in the rotation come the end of the playoffs. And it's like, well, maybe what you have to say is come hell or high water, like he's going to play next year in the playoffs because we can't afford not to play him. We need to build the roster with that assumption.
And then that's where I come down. It's just like, I understand. I can understand Joe's philosophy and like the guys that he ultimately leaned into, but I do think like when Hauser was playing consistently, his defense was at least serviceable, and they tried to hunt him, and obviously there were times where his numbers looked great because they were tripped over themselves trying to go at him. I do hope they just kind of lean into development, lean into seeing what you got in these guys, because I think just like you said, it almost has to. Let's end on this. So we keep talking about that second apron. Like what's the most concerning aspect of the measures that will go against teams to you? Or is it just the totality of not being able to trade your pick 7 years out, the whole not being able to go above someone's salary to trade them? Like what's the most restrictive nature of a team that even dares try to stay above that line?
I think the draft pick stuff is what will scare teams off the most because it's so far in the future. And so when they traded for Derek White, I sort of was like, I can't believe you're trading a top 1 protected pick swap this far in the future. Like just the tail risk on that is so great, and it has worked out wonderfully. And I was happy to be wrong about that. But if you're talking about just locking in these picks 7 years down the line, and you're in the a couple of times, and now it's the 30th pick, or if there's 5 teams all doing it, we'll see. Maybe we'll have interesting tiebreakers for who the last pick of the first round is in the future. So I think that's the thing that will scare teams off the most. The trade stuff is really restrictive as well. Like, I haven't seen this reported. My reading of one of the provisions of what's in the term sheet is that you cannot trade outbound sign-in trades anymore. You can't use that to get players. You won't get a TPE from it. Like, basically, you get nothing from doing outbound sign-in trades, which has always been, you can't do an inbound sign-in trade. And I'm a little unclear as to reading this, like, 2 sentences, but I think that's what it's trying to say. But there's other stuff about you can't aggregate players. Like, you can only send 1-for-1 trades. Those 1-for-1 trades, you can't take back any more money than you're sending out. There's generic restrictions in this about how you can't package up minimum salary players anymore, like what they did to get Brogdon,
right,
in order to do any trades. So some of that is less important anyway at certain points of the year, but there are just a lot of restrictions around, like, it becomes really hard to add any salary when you get to that point, and it becomes really hard just to sort of make contracts work and match up. Adding in the fact that you don't have the mid-level, and the mid-level can be used in trades as well in the future, and trade exceptions disappear at the end of the year, so you can't roll them over into the offseason. Like, there's just so much stuff going on there that the totality of it is a real problem. But I think the thing that will scare teams off is, like, we're not going to give up our first round pick 7 years out not give it up. We're not going to lock it to our team 7 years out and risk having it fall to the bottom of the round. Like, 7 years is just too far in the future. God knows, the fear of you have a year where everybody gets injured and you would be in the lottery, but instead you're locked to the 30th pick in the draft. Like, that's what's going to scare teams away, I think, primarily. But the totality of it is very, very difficult to work through.
We should bet on the first team to be stupid enough to lose that first round pick, and like, will the Lakers?
Clippers. I don't know how the Clippers get out of it. They have too much money. Like, the speed in which this is all coming to fore, or the Warriors, right? Like, what are you supposed to do if you're $50 million over this line? Like, there aren't ways to get out of it in one off season that aren't going to be very painful. So, like I said, I think the lines are too. I don't think they drew the lines high enough, but regardless of that, it is clearly coming too quickly in order to be fair to certain teams that just didn't know the rules. Like, what were you supposed to do? They played by the rules as they were before, and then suddenly the rules are changed, and they're like, well, you get a grace period of 1 off season. Like, that's just not enough.
And my big question now is, because I hadn't even thought of it in that regards, is now how as a, like, progressively thinking team and smart team, how do you take advantage of that? Is there someone you can pry from the Warriors, knowing that they have to dump salary? And I don't know if the Celtics are in any sort of position to do that, especially as we just laid out.
Yeah, no.
but the obvious answer is no. But could you? I don't know. I guess if you got creative, and that's why Zarin and gets paid a whole bunch of money to try and figure these things out.
Well, if you're the Spurs, you get Wembanyama, and suddenly you're sitting on all this cap space where you can extract value from other, like, it's like, oh, good job, you tanked for 2 years, and so now you get all the benefits. Like, it doesn't really make any sense from that perspective. They must be frustrated. Like, they have to look at this and be like, well,
for sure.
What are we supposed to do with this? Like, we were very careful for years, doing everything the right way. We drafted this team, we traded, we signed extensions, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, by the way, too bad. That was all. Actually, you shouldn't have done any of that.
Well, it's fascinating. It adds a huge subplot to an already kind of, like I said, I don't think it's gonna be a crazy offseason, but I do think it makes decisions just that much more challenging. Ryan, as always, thank you for your knowledge. I told you I'd keep you for 20 minutes. I kept you for 40. So that's what I do. But thank you for being so smart.
Well, it's always a pleasure to come on to the big time here. So thanks for inviting me on.
All right, Ryan's just so good at this stuff. Like, he thinks about the layers of it that I just don't get to. And, part of the reason I love his way of looking at it is that you don't get caught up in necessarily emotional nature. It's easy to sit here and say, well, okay, Jaylen Brown is a flawed player. They have to trade him. Or Jaylen Brown has been super good for long stretches. They just got to give him that super max. It's like, how does signing Jaylen Brown, or how does dealing Jaylen Brown, how does that affect the ability of the Celtics to put together a championship roster? And so I think what's clear to me is that these changes are coming fast. I think it's easier for the Celtics, especially with this, and I don't want to even call it a ramp up period, but because these extensions won't kick in for at least another summer, and then another summer after that, you do have a little bit of a ramp here to kind of figure it out. Okay, is this the best path forward? Does having 2 players making 35% of the max complicate your path to be remaining a championship level contender? So I think they're taking the best approach to this. And, like, looks, things could go weird this summer, but I do think this group has proven that it can be championship level even before Malcolm Brogdon's arrival. Eager to see how they tweak the fringe here, tweak around the edges, try to get this team to be a little bit more crisp than it was this past season, even if it means stepping back a little bit with the totality of the talent on this roster. Some of the measures that are going to be enacted if you stay over that second apron seem really, really daunting, and it's going to force it will cripple teams that do not get below that mark in terms of roster building. And I don't know, like, I think the goal here is parity and having more teams in the mix every year and not allowing a team like the Warriors and Clippers to spend crazy money to be in the mix. But that didn't always. You ask the Clippers how much it guaranteed success, and I think it's got to be frustrating for someone like Brad Stevens, who comes in and has prioritized the ability to have long-term continuity with the group and being willing to spend money to field a legitimate contender after dodging the tax at various times. And now, essentially being told, hey, quickly, you got to reverse course. You got to maybe prioritize shorter term contracts and get this thing in line really quickly, or else you're really complicating your path to being a title contender. This is just part one of our kind of cap week that we're doing. Bobby Marks from ESPN is going to join us later this week to sort of give his front office insider view of like how the Boston Celtics can possibly navigate it. Interested to get, even more opinions on what this team can do to ensure its best chance of not only being competitive next season and the year after that, but deep into the future. And, again, there's more questions than answers right now. Even people around the league are wondering exactly how this is all going to work and how it's all going to play out and the effects that it's going to have. But I do think it's going to add quite the wrinkle and wild card to the NBA as it all settles in, and eager to see what happens. I need everybody to go like, subscribe, check us out on the YouTube page. Like I said, we'll be back later this week with even more CBA, NBA talk, and like I said, transactions are right around the corner. We'll catch you next time on the Celtics Talk Podcast.